Hello, hello. Welcome back to this week's episode of the podcast. We are going to be looking at all things ego defense today. And not just any old ego defenses. We want to talk about them as they come up when we're expanding, when we're growing, when we're doing the next big thing we say we want to do. And suddenly we find ourselves in all sorts of resistance and tying ourselves up in knots and self-sabotage and all of those sorts of things. Okay, so that's what we're going to be deep diving into today. And I'm sure if you are a coach or if you are someone who works with people, or maybe if you're not even in the coaching industry yet, but just generally look around at people in your life. And if we're really honest, if we look at ourselves honestly and, with compassion and love too, we can see this in ourselves, right? But we notice this thing where people desire expansion and they want healing and they want the goal, right? I just want to meet the right person, or, oh God, I would just love this incredible job, or to have this amazing, successful business. I want this transformation, and they're passionate about it. They might even sign up for your offers, if you're a coach or if you're a practitioner of some kind, and they're all really excited to start. And again, get really curious if this sounds like you sometimes as well. But when push comes to shove, okay, it's almost like something happens when the expansion, when the shift, when that transformation becomes real. Sometimes people call it self-sabotage that kicks in, or resistance, all right? But really what this is it's ego defense. And sometimes this term gets confused a little bit. I'm going to come on to definitions and things like that in a moment. But really, when we can feel so excited for something, and there's a part of us that really wants this incredible result or goal, or even if we just want to move through the other side of something really deep and heavy in our lives, and we want to go through transformation, and we want, we want to do all of this incredible stuff, but it feels like one foot's on the brake. That's defense. That's ego defense. All right. And now here's the trick with ego defenses. They show up in very unsuspecting ways. Yes, there's the usual kind of, I'm just going to hit all of the excuses, or, I'm going to just kind of like stick my head in the sand and not pay attention to this. All right. But your most resistant clients are not likely digging their heels in or showing up as uncoachable. They're the ones who are just subtly, very, very subtly undermining their own success. Sometimes there's just this little bit of an energetic weight that you feel enter the coaching space. There's just this little bit of friction that you notice. There's this little bit of a drag energetically in the space. And that's where so much of coaching work is energetic. And as coaches, very intuitive people, we can feel it, okay? So the most unsuspecting, insidious form of ego defense often is first detected not in excuses, not in digging the heels in or being combative. It can be, but usually it's a lot more subtle. It shows up in the energetic drag in the coaching space. So I want to shine a light on these very insidious ego defenses today. And what I've done, just to sort of really make this a little clearer as well, is that I've identified 5 main archetypes that we slip into, right, when we're in ego defense and when we're in all of this resistance. And I hope that by doing that, and this is the beauty of archetypes, I think too, is that by defining them that way, my hope is that you'll be able to better spot them, obviously, in your clients, but also, of course, maybe yourself as well. All right. So we're going to get into that today. And I guess this is the other thing too. I've been doing this work for over 12 years now. I've been working as a coach, specifically running my own coaching practice. I've been in this industry, that's quite a long time actually in this industry, because it's quite a new field. So I'm a bit of an OG in this space, but not just in terms of my time as a coach, but if I look at my 45 years of life, all right, things like expansion and death and rebirth cycles and transformational cycles, I'm sure very similar to you, okay, tends to be what draws us to professions like coaching and other helping-based professions, is that all of this death and rebirth and transformation, it's part of my soul blueprint, okay? It's literally in my natal chart. It's literally not just that, but if I look at the patterns and the synergies of my life, all of it has been about endings, transitions. It's in my freaking DNA. And I'm not just talking about in the physical world, all right? I've been through so much in terms of my story, my family history, my own, relocating across the world, and all of the different things, okay? But most importantly, these endings and expansive transitions have happened for me at an identity level internally. And that's probably had a lot to do with the fact that, the last 20 years, Pluto was conjunct pretty much all of my major freaking personal planets. So it was conjunct, my sun, all right, my, my vertex, my Mercury. Now it's conjunct my freaking Mars and South Node. It's all happening, all right, because I've got this is the thing, all right. So side note, I've got this crazy 6-planet stellium in the 8th house, and Pluto is transiting all of it. Frankly, my entire life is literally about big transformation. And so when it comes to this topic of ego defense and how that's triggered when we get into this place of expanding and our edges growing, all right, this is literally the curriculum of my life. And so what I've had to do, and by all means, I see so many of these ego defenses in myself, all right? But it is possible to work with and to overcome these ego defenses. And I say that term loosely because the thing with psychodynamic coaching, and I think just consciousness work generally, is it's never about eliminating anything. It's about working with ego defenses. It's about understanding them, and it's about bringing yourself into more of a compassionate relationship with them. And so, there's something that I've really had to learn through the freaking masterclass that is my life, not just the fact that I've worked with literally hundreds of clients in this space, but it's about how do we go from being all contracted and self-sabotagey, right, around expansion into a place of literally moving forward and momentum and feeling expansive as we do it. This has been a real soul lesson of mine, to move from a place of contraction, from these kind of collapse archetypes and defensive archetypes into the archetype of the one that is clear, the one that moves forward, the one that is decisive, all right? So I have a lot of that energy, and that's a big part of, I think, what we're being asked to cultivate through understanding our ego defenses. It's not about buying into them. It's not about collapsing into them. It's not about pretending like they're not there or just pushing through them. It's about coming into relationship with them so we can step into our power more. That's what that means, to actually get momentum and clarity so we can move forward in our life. All right. So a lot of people, again, still part of this sidebar, all right, you'll notice that the death of an old identity, this kind of internal expansion, because we go through all sorts of transformation, don't we? We go through literal deaths and relocations and marriages and relationship problems, all of that. But when we talk about the death of an identity, this is where most people's ego resistance is triggered big time, okay? And a lot of coaches and experts talk about identity death, and I think partially that's because it just sort of sounds quite juicy, but very few can speak to what this actually looks like in practice, in the intensity of the defenses that the ego will throw up, okay? Many people talk about, oh, you got to let one identity die, but well, how? What does that look like, Susan, right? So a big part of what I want to talk about today, and again, the purpose of me pulling together these archetypes and sharing it with you in this way, is that when we're being asked to grow, when we're being asked to lean in, I want people to see and understand that more, not just as a sort of a minor inconvenience, but really as an invitation to your next level of soul expansion and growth. And here's the other secret thing about ego defenses as well. Often they come up because they're protecting something very vulnerable, right? They're protecting something, or they're fighting against something that's very vulnerable within us that wants to be seen in that moment. Grief, shadow parts, for example, possibly even our own creative brilliance. I'm going to come on to that in a moment. But before I sort of get into the archetypes, the reality is, and I'm sure you know this if you're on this journey, expansion will cost you something. Expansion will cost you something. And a lot of people want the expansion without paying the price for that expansion. I talk about this all the time. It's going to cost you at a minimum your old identity. It's possibly going to cost you some relationships. It's possibly going to cost you actual money or time, effort. There's always a toll to pay if you truly want to expand. And as I said, the sneaky thing is a lot of people say they want to expand, they want to hit the goal, they want to do the thing, but their defenses are taking them out in the background. So, next part of this podcast, what I want to do is focus on psychic structure, okay? Because here's the thing, I think to really understand ego defenses, because there's so much misinformation out there about it, to understand defenses, we have to understand how the psyche is structured. And for me, this is a real gap in the coaching and just helping professions generally. Because if you don't understand where your defenses come from and how they're triggered, we can't help our clients, we can't help ourselves move through them. So we got to understand where defenses really come from. Now, many people, if you'll notice this in the online space as well, Instagram and Substack, and people talking about this stuff generally, but you'll notice that many coaches believe that it's the shadow that is resisting your growth. How many times have you heard this? Oh, you want to do all of these amazing things in your life, but it's your shadow that keeps sabotaging you. Have you heard that one? Okay. And that's because so many coaches out there are operating under this misinformation, frankly, that the shadow is somehow dark and evil, and it's this sort of secret thing that we have within us that's sabotaging our lives from behind the scenes. And this is fundamentally, this is a hill I will die on, okay? But it's like, this is fundamentally untrue. Because often the majority, and I've seen this in practice, the majority of what's contained in our shadow is our lightness, our brightness, our boldness, our bigness. Even the darker parts that are in our shadow, they still want to be seen. They have this natural inclination towards integration, and Carl Jung spoke a lot about this. Okay, it's part of our individuation journey to bring the conscious and the unconscious together. The unconscious desperately wants your attention, desperately frickin' wants to be integrated. It's not the thing that's sabotaging your success. What people get wrong is that it is our ego that resists our growth. It's our ego, not our shadow, that throws up ego defenses. Clues in the title, right? So this is really important. And usually, and I'm kind of keeping this relatively high level, there's complexity and nuance to this, okay? But a lot of people say, again, because we've sort of been operating under this misinformation that it's the shadow that is self-sabotaging us and, causing all of this resistance and mayhem in the backs of our minds somewhere, people say to me, but hang on, but surely the ego is the one setting the goal, right? The ego is the one that wants all of the love and the success and wants the transformation. Absolutely true, okay? But the ego, and this is really important, the ego is multifunctional, all right? It's multifunctional. Our ego is overall, it's that sense of I in the world. This is who I am, right? This is my personality. This is what I believe. These are my, my inner thoughts. This is how I feel about the world. This is how I move and operate in the world. This is me. This is Amanda, right? Okay, it's our sense of I. But the thing is, that's not the only role. The ego also has the role of protecting that identity like hell. Right? It will fight to defend our sense of self like nothing else. And the thing with expansion, the thing with reaching for the goal, reaching for the love you say you want, reaching for the success of your business, that deeply threatens our sense of self. It's destabilizing. Because when we've gone through 30, 40, 50, 80 years of operating with this is who I am, okay? These are my goals and this is my personality. When we're asked to stretch beyond that, as transformation requires of all of us, guess what happens? All right? The ego throws up a bunch of defenses against itself. All right? The ego, this is the part that gets missed, the ego is often at war with itself. One part of our ego wants the thing, wants to move through this time of transition, wants the goal, but then it's kind of in direct combat, typically with the part that's defending like hell against getting the thing, attaining the thing, becoming the thing. So we have this is a great example of psychodynamic tension, right? We have these two competing parts of us that are actually part of the same unit, okay? That's that tension. That's that psychodynamic tension. And often, again, let's just throw out some examples. That happens typically when we're going through deaths and rebirths and endings in life. It happens when we are crossing a threshold, right? Maybe we are crossing a threshold from employee to entrepreneur, for example, or from maiden to mother, all right? Or from mother to wild woman. We're making some of these threshold adjustments in our life that require big shifts in our world around us. Perhaps we're making an investment, all right? So this often happens as well because money is a very important kind of a symbolic act of I'm crossing this threshold, I'm making this decision, I'm investing in a future identity. That's why people invest in coaching, all right? Because they want to solve the problems that they're going through now and they want something different. They want to typically step into being a new version of themselves, all right? And again, a lot more nuanced than that, but just sort of keeping it high level at the moment. If we're leveling up, all right, that's when expansion happens. You've got so many examples here, right? Expansion happens through all of these allowing things to die and to be reborn in our worlds. These require big upgrades. There's a lot of scary stuff happening. There's new levels of growth that are being demanded of us. Our identity is being challenged. All of it provokes ego defense. But our ego, and this is really important, our ego is also threatened, also throws up a bunch of defenses when our subconscious shadow material wants to be known. The shadow wants to be seen. And so when our shadow starts making itself known, either through projection or triggers, okay, or through symbolism or dreams, or just through day-to-day strange occurrences, okay, that also provokes ego defense. Our ego is a very powerful, but a very fragile thing. It's ridiculously good at defending our sense of self without even realizing that we're doing it. Because everyone says that they want expansion, they want consciousness, they want success, yet when the opportunity rolls around to go for it, when shit gets real, where you got to put your money where your mouth is, the ego trips you up. It's not your shadow. Your shadow is there waiting to be integrated. All right? It's your ego that trips you up. So clever as well. So going back to what I was saying, I've done a lot of work in terms of looking at these archetypes and kind of categorizing these trip ups. Okay. I see them in myself. All right. I've seen them in myself throughout the years. I've seen them in my clients. I've seen them in my clients' clients, people in my life. All right. To the point where I've just kind of gently started tracking these archetypal patterns. All right. These patterns of defense. And as I said, archetypes are fun. They're good to play with. They're powerful as well as fun because they're patterns, they're representations of ways of doing things, they're mental images, they're symbols, all right? They give us some orientation and a sense of what's happening, all right? So archetypes almost allow us to see the invisible more clearly, to see the patterns more clearly. Because as I said, this stuff can be really stealthy and insidious. So let's get into the archetypes, all right? So there's 5 of them that I've kind of discovered. There were 4 originally, and then I'm like, I think there's a 5th. So you got like a bit of a bonus 5th archetype. And what I want to do is give you a rundown and a little synopsis of each of these 5, all right? And as I'm doing this, there's 2 things I really want you to do because I love my podcast to be sort of interactive, all right? I don't want you to just passively listen. Pause this and get your journal out, all right? But what I want you to do is 2 things. Number 1, think about clients that you might have worked with, or maybe there's people in your life, if you're not yet a coach, that embody these archetypes. Where have you seen these patterns before? Perhaps they've been in your coaching containers. Maybe you've seen them at the end. People often, reaching the end of a coaching container. Sometimes these ego defenses can kick in, or maybe even at the start of coaching containers too, when people are making investments. We see a lot of ego defense come up as well, right? Wherever people are experiencing a growth edge, you'll see ego defense. But also, secondly, as always, get honest with yourself. Which ones do you embody? All right. What's your style of defense when it comes to expansion? How do you defend against expansion and essentially sabotage yourself? All right. I think the thing to remember with these archetypes before I get into them is that they activate when an expansion of identity becomes real. It's like, oh shit, okay, all right, I've done all the navel gazing, all right, I've done all of the journaling and the everything else, but it's like, okay, it's time to actually move forward. And, momentum is fine and transformation can be really inspiring when we talk about it, but when it starts to demand self-redefinition, that's when the ego intervenes. And again, very subtle sometimes. So let's get into these. So I want to talk about each of these 5, and I'm just going to give you a bit of a flavor as to the sort of the name of the archetype, obviously, that I've come up with, but the sort of language that you're likely to hear when this archetype's kicking in, when this defense is kicking in. So the first one I've called the intellectual neutralizer. All right. So this sounds like, okay, see if you've heard this before. Clients who say, I already know this. I've done this before. I've already been on this journey. Okay. Or maybe there's a slightly more sophisticated version of that, which is this just confirmed what I already knew. This just confirmed what I've already been doing. Okay. There's like a subtle difference in that. Another one is, well, this was great, but I'm just not sure where this fits or how I can use this information or how I can use this knowledge that I've gained, right? There's a subtle negging element to that too, okay? And can you see what's happening there? And again, there's more language I'm sure we could put around this, but there's a mechanism under all of those things, this intellectual neutralizing. And that mechanism is minimization. I'm going to minimize the effectiveness of what's happened. I'm going to minimize my experience to protect my identity. If I downgrade the transformation and everything I've just been through, then I don't have to admit that actually I avoided it. Got it? So this shows up a lot for people who have maybe, I see this with clients of mine who have maybe run group coaching containers too. And I've had a couple of these people too, where they sort of hover around the content. They hover around or they treat it like an academic exercise, okay? Or they maybe show up to your coaching sessions a little disconnected or a little bit more intellectual, okay, maybe wanting to talk about more strategy stuff, not really feeling prepared to go deep, all right, wanting to intellectualize, all right, or feeling like maybe a bit of ego there, right? I already sort of knew this, all right, not sure what this is adding, okay? And again, I say this to all of my clients. There is always an opportunity to step into student mindset. I would never be, and I can say this hand on heart, and I can't remember, who was it? Is it Tony Robbins? Okay, love him or hate him. He has this philosophy as well, which is I will sit in the front row of someone's speech. They're doing a TED talk or they're doing something even at the local community center and there's 10 people there. Sit in the front row and you take notes. Tony Robbins does that to this day. I heard him on a podcast once, and again, love or hate the guy, doesn't really matter. The point is that no matter how big you are, no matter how much you think you know, there's always an opportunity to learn. And he showed up to a particular conference. Don't know the circumstances, can't remember. But essentially there was a guy chatting on stage, he was delivering a speech, and there was just like a dozen people in the room. And Tony's people were like, hey, Tony, this is kind of beneath you, mate. Let's get you off somewhere else. And Tony's like, no, there's always something to learn. He literally sat in the front row, pulled out a notebook and started taking notes, okay? So it's this student mindset. People who resist the student mindset, okay, it's a good chance that they're an intellectual neutralizer, all right? So that's a really important one, okay? And again, I think it's get really curious. Have you seen this in your clients? Have you seen this in yourself as well? The second one is the spiritual bypasser, right? And so kind of related, and this is the thing with all of these archetypes, they bleed into each other, they play into each other a little, and it's completely possible to occupy two or more of these as well, all right? Because they're sort of interrelated. So the spiritual bypasser, so tell me if you've heard this language, all right? This doesn't feel aligned, all right? I just don't feel connected anymore. I'm just trusting my intuition here. I'm getting bad vibes about the situation. Now, is there spiritual discernment in everything? Of course there is. But this is about being really honest, okay? Because the thing is, until you've really learned to work with intuition, until you've really done enough shadow work as well, sometimes we mistake our intuition for fear. All right. So we got to be careful on this one. It takes a lot of discernment. And ironically, that's the mechanism of this particular archetype. When something doesn't feel aligned, I've seen this particularly, I see this sometimes with business clients, actually. Like years ago, I remember this, where someone would come through my mastermind. It was very rare, but it did happen from time to time, and they were feeling so certain and so clear about their way forward. They were excited about it. They developed this incredible new program, okay, that was really going to help people. They were into it, but then something happened over the course of a couple of days, and then suddenly, oh, this doesn't feel aligned anymore, all right? What that is, the mechanism there is fear reframed as discernment. Expansion can feel so destabilizing. And so our nervous system goes into a bit of a mini panic. And that creates a spiritualized exit. That's a sneaky one, all right? I've definitely done that one, okay, myself. So it's really important to notice that. Is it really not aligned, or actually are you just a bit afraid? Okay? No shame in that, but it's time to get really honest. Third one, the overwhelm collapse. All right, so let's talk about this, because this is very common, and I'm sure you've seen this in your clients. Maybe you've seen this in yourself too. So number one, the sort of language is, this is just a lot. I'm really overwhelmed. Okay, I need space. I'm not ready. I've got all of this other stuff going on in my life. I've got all of the kids and the paperwork and the housework and the job that I'm working, all right? I don't have any time. Yeah, the mechanism underneath all of that. And by the way, I'm not saying this stuff isn't true. People, particularly if you've got a job and a husband and kids or partner, and, people are busy. But often what sits beneath this, particularly if it's a repeated pattern, a repeated excuse. I don't have any time. I'm not ready. I need space. I'm overwhelmed. People who get overwhelmed is just a lot, okay? It's activation disguised as incapacity. So when visibility starts to increase, all right, responsibility increases, momentum and expectations, all these sort of stuff starts to increase. Instead of saying, again, hey, guess what? I'm just scared of stepping into this level. What the psyche says, what the ego says, is it's too much. Yeah, it's too much. Because overwhelm, and this is the sneaky thing with overwhelm, it's the very insidious thing about it. When paired with excuses around things like time and kids, all right, very real world issues, okay, school runs and all of that, but overwhelm becomes the socially acceptable brake pedal, doesn't it? Because no one can question the fact that you got 3 kids, you got to get dinner on the table at 7:00, and right, you're running around and doing all of the things. No one can question that. We can't dare question that. All right, it's the socially acceptable brake pedal. And again, I'm not saying that those things aren't very real, but when used time and time again, particularly when you say that you've got this big, incredible goal or this big expansion that you want to step into, yet the excuses just keep coming up and up and up and over and over and over, okay, it's worth looking at. Get curious about that. Because I think say that you're overwhelmed, in many ways, I say this with love, right? In many ways, it just feels softer and easier to say that I'm scared. It's more socially acceptable than avoidance, okay? It's easier to say I'm overwhelmed. But the truth is, it's still expansion resistance. It's still an ego defense, yeah? So that's that one. And this is the other one that often follows, I've noticed. So the one that follows the overwhelm collapse is the archetype that I call the perfectionist retreat. This shows up a lot in business containers especially, and coaches who are maybe stepping out, building their new business, for example, practitioners who are setting up online. A lot of the language that you'll hear, I've heard as well, I'm not quite ready. Okay, I need to refine it more. This was me. I was the one that was working on my website behind the scenes, scared as hell to press publish, okay? I need to just refine it. I need to get the words perfect. Oh, I need to go and have another photo shoot because I need headshots, okay? All right? I don't want to put something out that isn't fully aligned. I don't want it to look unprofessional, all right? I need more clarity before I move forward. I don't want to do myself a disservice. I'm conscientious, okay? The mechanism, I'm laughing because it's like, this was just all me, okay, at one point. Excuse me. But the mechanism around that, it's all about control. But it's control in disguise because, they were moving typically and they were getting some great momentum. They were starting to get visible. And then suddenly the stakes are rising. Okay. And it's like, oh shit, nervous system freak out. All right. Ego clamps down. Fear kicks in, all of the things, and then suddenly perfectionism arrives to protect them from exposure. If I keep refining, I'll never have to be judged. All those people who are going to see my social media posts, oh my God, oh, my website, oh, coming out of the spiritual closet, who's going to see that? So I've got to keep refining my about page, all right? I've got to keep hooking up all of my systems behind the scenes. If I keep doing the busy work, I'll never have to deal with being judged. And it sounds very conscientious, but it's identity preservation. And I know that one very well. Do you too? Okay. Now, on to the last one. The moral high ground collapse. This is like my bonus one that sort of came to me after I was thinking about those first 4. And I'm like, hang on, this one's rare, but it's very powerful. And I've seen it more and more, particularly over the last couple of years. All right. So here's the language around this one. This might trigger a few people. So the language around this one is, I don't want to become too commercial. All right. I don't resonate with marketing. I don't like marketing strategies. This feels capitalist. I don't want to cause harm. I don't want to exploit others' pain. I don't want to exploit my gifts, right? Or they point out flaws and gaps in other people's stuff as well. A lot of people who have this moral high ground thing often like to point out flaws and gaps, and where someone's doing something wrong, or they've got to add sort of a little bit of a viewpoint that kind of subtly reneges or undermines someone, okay, versus just getting on with their own stuff and making their own changes in their life. All right. So this is a really, it's powerful, this one, because this ties into values. Values are an ego thing, okay? Ties into deep values. It ties into cultural stuff. It ties into bloody political stuff, right? This is a really important one because the mechanism underneath all of this, I don't want to be too commercial. It's all capitalism and, it's actually shadow. It's shadow around power and success and money. And look, I'm not an advocate for capitalism or anything else. I don't know, not getting into that discussion here. But what I'm saying is if you're looking at that and if that keeps sabotaging your goals and the things that you say you want to create a successful business, you're going to have to charge people money. You're not a charity. Okay. You got to start, putting yourself out there, charging and pricing up your services. And so if you keep getting in your head thinking, oh, I'm just kind of part of the problem and this is too commercial, guess what? You might not be an entrepreneur, okay? Part of being, and this is this is like a sidebar, okay? It's not just about becoming an amazing coach or amazing at your craft. If you're here to make an impact, if you're here to really work with people and help change lives, it's about making money too. You're running a business. And I know that feels like a really weirdly and unpalatable truth for a lot of people. But, charity work is amazing, but that's not going to keep your lights on. All right. And what I'm not saying is that you need to fall into bad practice and, charging all of these $50,000 to $100,000 containers and things like that. But it's about charging a fair price for your work, a price that doesn't feel just fair. It feels enlivening to you. It's going to keep your clients accountable. And I've always had from the very beginning, and take this if it helps you, the more money I earn, the more people I am helping and serving. The more money I earn, the more people I'm helping and serving, because that's just a truth. More people that come through my programs, more people that do this work. I know people leave transformed. Okay. So it's a big part of getting this one into your psyche, really looking at this one, if this is you. Okay, because there can be some real shadow stuff happening around power and success and money. And a lot of that's very cultural, very family heavy. Okay, because sometimes, for example, success, think about this in terms of shadow, success can threaten your moral identity. If you've built an ego that's all moral and righteous, okay, doesn't do the wrong thing, okay, your shadow there's a shadow of success for you. What's in your shadow is likely something that's like immorality. To be successful, do I need to be immoral? Okay, that scares the hell out of people. And it's not true, by the way, but it's just part of our psyche and how we're made up. And so if success threatens your moral identity, what happens is people retreat into ethical superiority. I'm going to say that again. If success threatens your moral identity, people typically retreat into ethical superiority. Right? Oh, I don't need to make a lot of money. I just want to help people and make a positive ripple of change in the world, but I don't need to be successful doing it. Okay, Jan, who's going to pay your bills? All right. So, but this is a little bit of my, again, in terms of my story, I've always paid my own bills. I've always paid my own mortgage. I've never been financially supported. All right. So I'm very much of the mindset, and always have been, that the buck stops with me. So I'm very good with this. Okay. And when I say very good with it, it took some time, but again, it's like, I know that this isn't just about creating a positive ripple effect of change. It's absolutely that in terms of my why and my spiritual work and contract and soul contract, all of the things. And I know that I'm here to be incredibly successful. The two aren't mutually exclusive. I've done a lot of work around integrating that success shadow piece. I find this is really common, this one, amongst therapists, entering coaching, people with certain political persuasions as well, of course, spiritual practitioners, or people with a big spiritual identity. And I see this, and there's so many talented people that are freaking paupers because they're scared about being too commercial. Okay? I don't want to exploit people. You don't have to exploit people to be successful. You got to help people. That's what you're here to do as a coach. You're not here to exploit. You're here to help, to serve, to transform. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time on that one because, as I said, it kind of came to me at the end as like a bit of a, oh, actually, there's this other thing. I couldn't quite find words to it, but I feel like that one's potent because it feels virtuous, right? And we all want to be seen as virtuous. That's the ego masks that we have. We want to be seen as virtuous. We're scared of being seen as unvirtuous or power hungry or money led. That's the stuff that's typically in the shadow. Okay. And again, remember, shadow is not the fact that you are secretly power hungry or secretly money driven. All right. It just means that you're scared of being seen that way. All right. So you've got to make your peace with those shadow parts. You've got to integrate them in order to move through this one. All right. So they're the 5. Okay, what do you think about those? I'm really keen to hear your notes. You're welcome to, I said, I love hearing from you guys, so you're very welcome to leave a comment below the podcast as well. What have you noticed about that? Because remember, those archetypes, they share one thing. They activate when that identity expansion becomes real. When there's some momentum and transformation, it feels all inspiring and it all feels great. But when self-redefinition hits, that's when the ego typically intervenes. And so these are the sorts of defenses and mechanisms that we work with deeply inside of the Psychodynamic Coach Academy. All right. As I said before, there's this psychodynamic tension that exists within all of us in a multitude of ways. And it's my real aim to bring more of an education around how the psyche is structured, to re-educate around that, but also talk about how to work with that in a coach appropriate way as well. Okay, because understanding the psyche at its different levels is crucial. All right, it's crucial. As I said, so many experts refer to this sort of stuff as being from the shadow. Oh, it's the shadow driving all of these defenses. It's not. It's your ego. So we have to understand the psyche. So as coaches, we know which part to work with. When people come to us with their challenges and when they go into these defense mechanisms, is very common through coaching or any sort of people work. It's really important that we understand this stuff, understand what level we're working at. We're not trying to work on something that's shadow related when actually it's just the freaking ego all caught up, all right, and dramatizing things. So very different techniques working with these different parts of the psyche, right? So as I said, go through this exercise. Very, very common, these scenarios to come up in client situations. And of course, get really honest with yourself. It always starts with awareness, all right? Which one's your go-to? Which one do you do? All right, I already told you about my perfectionism one. What about you? So this is the sort of stuff that we unpack, as I said, in the PCA. And I just think that, yes, it starts with the education of the psyche, but then it also is about, well, what are the tools and frameworks that we can use to help guide people through this? Having a really robust toolkit that works at the level of the subconscious, that works with the shadow, but also works with that subconscious tension within different parts of our psyche as well, the ego versus the ego. Sometimes the ego is versus the shadow, and then there's a whole lot of emotional stuff that's sandwiched in between, and then we've got archetypes, and we've got the persona masks that we wear. All of these parts are different. They all interact, and we've got the body as well. And so being able to support someone at this holistic level is so, so powerful at creating real change, because you can imagine just trying to cheerlead someone okay, through a defensive period, or if someone's going through a bit of an overwhelmed moment, just being like, come on, you can do it, Susan. Like, you're amazing. Look at all of the incredible stuff. Just say your affirmations. Doesn't work. It might make Susan feel good in the moment, but she's going to continue to sabotage her success. She's going to continue to throw up the overwhelm card. Okay, every time that her success gets closer and closer, every time she's called to expansion, she collapses. All right, so being able to work with someone and to support them at that level of the psyche is so powerful. This is why people who graduate the PCA, when they go on and they set up incredible coaching practices, the worlds transform, okay? And I don't say that lightly. So if you're interested in joining our psychodynamic life coach training, our March cohort starts on the 30th, all right? We have 2 spots left. We're almost completely booked out, okay? So we get started at the end of this month. I definitely recommend that you check out the website, have a look at the program details. You can see all of the content and the curriculum that we cover. We also have the times and call dates and things like that. Check out the FAQ section. It's got all of that detail in there. And if it's calling you, I recommend that you book a discovery call with me over the next couple of days. As I said, we've only got 2 spots, so they will go. I'm very confident of that. And let's have a conversation. Let's make sure it's the right fit for you. Let's make sure your questions are answered. I can share a little bit more detail about the program. It's a pressure-free conversation, of course. My aim for those chats is that we have some time, and really it's about just making sure that we get the chance to know each other. We make sure it's the right fit moving forward, and that your questions get answered, okay? So whether I see you in the program or not, I do hope this episode was helpful today. I hope it got the cogs whirring and got you thinking about all things ego defense, okay? And hopefully we'll chat to you very soon if you're interested in becoming a psychodynamic life coach. But if not, I'll catch you on the next podcast episode. Take care. Bye.